now on to tonight's program. We're delighted to have John Holden with us, if you didn't skip out the back. Oh, he's still here. All right. Many of you might know John from his days at City News. That goes back. American Medical News. City Hall, where John worked in different capacities, including doing a communications work for the law department. So there, I could go on and on, but I'll just summarize by saying that John is a longtime journalist and public relations professional. And he's also a long life Chicago, born in Chicago. And he's been actively involved in many community organizations, historical societies over many years, over more than 30 years. He's currently the vice president of the Edgewater Historical Society. And so, you know what, I leave it at that because the Edgewater Historical Society, I'm sure John will cover that, is part of the genesis of John's wonderful book. So, John Holden.
Thank you, Greg. And I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for the constant prodding of my good friend Greg Borzo, who said, if I can write a book like this, you can write a book like this. So thank you, Greg, for all your support and encouragement over the years. So my name is John Holden. I'm with the Edgewater Historical Society, have been for about 8 years now. And I'll tell you right up front, this book grew out of an exhibit, a wonderful exhibit we had at the museum. We put up the exhibit for the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Edgewater Beach Hotel back in 2016. It was supposed to be up for 3 years, and COVID came along, yada, yada. During the COVID spell, we figured we would take it down, but I thought it was such a great exhibit, it would be a shame for it to be packed away and the public not to ever be able to see it. So I said, let's try to do this book. So one thing led to another, and we got the book. So hopefully we'll help keep the legacy of this amazing institution alive for many more years through the book. So before I get started, I'd just like to ask for a quick show of hands of how many people in the audience were ever at the hotel. All right, wow, very impressive, a goodly number there. So during Q&A, if you got any great anecdotes to share, would love to hear. I know one gentleman in the room said he saw Tommy Dorsey there at the, so that is like the sweet spot to hit all sweet spots. So anyhow, just a quick summation as to why we're even talking about this place. Chicago's had a lot of hotels that have come and gone over the years. Some really grand ones, but maybe none so grand as the Edgewater Beach. It really was an unusual place. I don't think there was anything else quite like it in the country. There are certainly very posh, opulent hotels all over the place. I've been into a couple in Palm Beach that just knock your eyes out. One is called the Breakers, and I think that's really kind of gives you a sense of what the Edgewater Beach would have been. Super elegant place. But the Edgewater Beach wasn't just a beautiful place, it was really a fun, lively place. It was the happening spot in Chicago. And it was a place where people wanted to be and to, see and be seen. And that's what happened there for the 52 years it was in business. It only lasted 52 years, kind of hard to believe. The first building of the complex opened in 1916, and then the whole place shut down more or less at the end of 1967. So it had a relatively brief run, but its legacy was enormous, and it's left quite a shadow in Chicago history. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the images I'm going to be showing you. So the book has about 225 pictures in it, but we had really a wealth of material to work with for the book, and we couldn't get everything into the book, so I've got about another 75, 80 images that I'll use in the presentation. And I'm not going to be able to touch on everything in the book, but I'm going to try to touch on a lot of the same elements. So very quickly, this is showing the larger campus area of the where the Edgewater Beach Hotel was located. This was in the late 1950s, right after they had put that enormous lake fill just east of where the hotel is. This is the hotel complex right here. And this was Lakeshore Drive. It was extended from its former terminus at Foster Avenue up to Hollywood by 1957. That is what cut the hotel right off from the waterfront. And some say that might have been the beginning of the end for the hotel. But there were a lot of factors that went into that. One thing we don't have in the book is colored pictures. So I just wanted to share with you a handful of color images of the hotel. This is kind of an iconic view of what the hotel would have looked like shortly after the annex was completed. So it was 2 towers. The shorter building was completed in 1916 in time for welcoming delegates to the 1916 presidential convention, the Republican presidential convention, which was held in Chicago. So they literally got the hotel built in just about 11, 12 months, which is mind-boggling to think how quickly they got it done. The area that it was built on was more or less kind of a marshy, swampy area. They had to build this enormous retaining wall along the waterfront, and then they did landfill behind that because a lot of it was lake bottom where they actually built the hotel. Point out a couple other things here. This little structure in the front of this building was the marine dining room, and that was probably the most iconic space in the whole hotel. This was a stage in the lake that they staged operas and light musicals and things like that on. The audience would sit along the shoreline here and watch the productions. This larger tower, the initial building was so successful, within a couple of years, they were hatching plans to expand it, and the second tower opened in 1924. And the two were connected by a very fancy hallway that I'll talk about a little later. So this is the marine dining room that I just referenced, and it was kind of like a gazebo-like building. It looked right out onto the lake. It had an enormous main floor, and then it had these 2 wings that flanked it, and you could overlook the main floor. They had dancing and music and all that kind of stuff going on there. That's where the bandstand was located. It was a room they could open up the ceiling right to the elements, and during the more pleasant weather in Chicago, they would open the glass doors to the front and give you that real lakefront experience. It's just another view of the marine dining room. They were constantly tweaking the decor, and it was a room for all seasons. They would do it up for the different holidays and so forth, but just a super beautiful space. You can actually see the lake right out in this image. You can see the lake in the background. Just a note about what we're looking at here. These are postcards, and Chicago was the postcard capital of America, probably the world, for many, many years. And I think the Edgewater Beach Hotel might have been one of the most popular topics for postcards because there were just millions and millions of postcards still available. If you're out on eBay, you can find a lot of these postcards on eBay. But it was a very popular subject. There were a lot of great spaces that people wanted to remember. And these were actually black and white photographs, but then they would hand paint the images. The postcard companies, Kurt Tyke being chief among them, employed armies. It was mainly a job occupied by women, but these brilliant colors were all kind of hand painted in on black and white images. Here's that fancy hallway that connected the 2 buildings. The brainchild behind the Edgewater Beach Hotel was a man by the name of Benjamin Marshall. Many people in the room know who he was. He was perhaps the most flamboyant architect in Chicago history. He was the designer of the Drake Hotel, which opened in 1909. That was an immediate success, and Marshall, he designed it for business associates of his, but he kind of got the notion that, I could probably build a hotel and maybe even have a ownership stake in it. And I think what we really need, though, is a hotel that's more like a country club. So that's how he landed on the idea of what became the Edgewater Beach Hotel. It had all kinds of amenities, aside from just being right on the waterfront. It also had a golf course, tennis courts, strolling gardens, children's playgrounds, anything you might need. And the two buildings had to be connected somehow, but you couldn't just have a plain old hallway. If you're in a Benjamin Marshall building, you had to have this grand space. Just walking back and forth between the buildings was an event in and of itself. This was about 200 feet long. And then as you got about to the halfway point, there were two grand lounges that flanked either side of the Passaggio. And these were the main reception areas for the hotel, places where you could just kind of lounge around and meet up with your friends who were staying at the hotel, or oftentimes they use these spaces for functions, weddings, wedding receptions, and conventions as well. And this is the other hotel lounge. So both these, all these structures between the two buildings were sitting on top of an enormous parking garage, which I'll get to in a minute. The hotel complex also had an enormous shopping arcade that fronted onto Sheridan Road, and it had any kind of amenity you might ever need inside the hotel. There was a beautiful florist shop, as you see here. There were also beauty shops, men's haberdasheries, women's clothing, novelties, drugstores, you name it. You really didn't have to leave the hotel for anything you might need. There were also over a half dozen restaurants and bars in the hotel throughout the years. This is probably the most memorable of all of them. This was called the Yacht Club. It was located on the ground level of the hotel, also facing right out on the lakefront, as you see there. You can see the waves of Lake Michigan. The whole idea of this space was to give you the impression that you were literally on a ship. While you were in there, you kind of came in on this gangplank-like entrance. As you were making your approach to the captain, a whistle would go off to welcome you. They would facilitate, storms. They had a canvas roof and canvas walls that would shake and rattle as though you're in severe weather. So it was a fun bar. It was a bar that you really could have a good time at. So. And that lasted from the first day the hotel opened until it closed. So just got a few other images, general images. So believe it or not, and the hotel claimed that they had the world's first indoor parking garage. This would have opened with the annex of in 1924. You can see here the entrance to the parking garage. And this is the lounge, that's the West Lounge there that straddles the Passaggio. The notion of an indoor parking garage was very novel, and they generally hyped that up quite a bit to their clientele over the next 20, 30 years especially. And they had doormen waiting down in the garage to greet the guests as they were arriving. This next image here was a little damaged, and we couldn't use it in the book, but I just wanted to include it because it showed you the exterior. This is this enormous terrace that straddled the north end of the original hotel building. It overlooked the golf course. So they had a big area up there. Their tables would be set out, and it was another great place to see people and be seen. So Benjamin Marshall, as I'd mentioned earlier, had this vision of the Edgewater Beach Hotel kind of being like the Blackstone Hotel of the North Lakefront. And he planned on a lot of connections between the hotel. If you were staying at the Blackstone and maybe wanted to go up to the Edgewater Beach to play golf or things like that, there was a lot of people coming back and forth, and they were also just trying to facilitate guests who were staying at the hotel to get downtown. And they had an enormous fleet of transportation devices ranging from private limousines and omnibuses. They had a schedule of regular bus service running back and forth from the hotel to downtown. They were just off Lakeshore Drive, so it was a relatively quick trip. But they also had boats. They had docks out in front of the hotel. You could take a boat downtown, or if you were in a real hurry, they had a plane. So for $10, you could get to downtown in a hurry. So no traffic jams there. So the Edgewater Beach Hotel's reputation was not just local, it was nationally known. And the main reason it was nationally known was because it had the best big band music going on at the hotel from the late teens, early 20s. And by the early 20s, the hotel had its own radio station, which allowed it to broadcast the concerts that were taking place in the Marine Dining Room out to initially to the Midwest, but then later on to the entire country. So it was a Saturday night special. People would stay home and listen to the great music with all the leading artists from the Edgewater Beach Hotel. So the Marine Dining Room was the main venue for that music, but during the summer, it was really the height of elegance and romance that you could ever imagine. They had the world's biggest outdoor dance floor. It was a 5,000 square foot marble dance floor in front of the band shell. It was gray marble, very, very elegant, and they would just pack the crowds in, especially on the weekends. They'd have thousands of people out there. So this is the place set up just to show you the capacity. Here's another postcard with a slightly different arrangement. So this is probably more typical of what the setup would be for dance. And this is what it looks like when you have a lot of people out there. And I've heard a lot of great stories since the book came out. I've been talking to a lot of people who had memories of it. Unfortunately, one gentleman who was my father, a friend of mine's stepfather, he just passed away, but told me some great stories. He was a boater, and they would take their boat from Diversey Harbor and sail up and drop anchor just offshore from the Edgewater Beach Hotel and listen to the music for free. So it was a popular pastime. So, and you can see how close that dance floor is to the lake. Those are the piers just on the left-hand side. So if you got a little too carried away on that dance floor, you probably could wind up in the lake and not mean it. So it's just another view of the Marine Dining Room. You get a little bit of the sense for the retractable roof they had there with the light coming in over the main area. This was during the 1920s, the man who ran the hotel. I should say a little bit about him right now. A man named William Dewey. He was the general manager of the hotel for the first 36 years of its existence. It was like a passion for him. He was absolutely meticulous in his planning and his attention to detail, and everything into place had to be perfect. He was also kind of a public relations genius, and was the man responsible for bringing radio to the hotel, which kind of came about through happenstance fashion. In the nearby neighborhood, there were two young guys. They were graduates of my alma mater, Lane Tech High School. They were the founders of what later became the Zenith Radio Company. They were working out of a basement in a 3-flat in the Uptown neighborhood. When Mr. Dewey made their acquaintance, he invited them to come set up shop at the hotel, and they really took the ball and ran with it. This is the bandstand for the Marine Dining Room. This was adjacent to where the radio station was. The radio station was located in a room just off the lobby of the hotel, and there was a glass window between the radio station and the bandstand, and the man running the controls at the radio station would give the signal to the conductor, and then they'd be off to the races with the concert. I can go on and on with all the names of all the various people that had played at this bandstand, but anyone who was anyone in music back in those days was there, from Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey to Xavier Cugat, Paul Whiteman. They were all there. And a lot of people got their start there at this place. Lawrence Welk, for instance, he first started to make a name for himself playing at the Edgewater Beach Hotel. The jazz trumpeter Bick Spiderbick was also, he dropped out of college to play a gig at the Edgewater Beach Hotel. A lot of, as Desi Arnaz, I can go on with endless names. So this is the radio station itself. They had a little performance area. They would do programming right out of the station itself. They had their own grand piano. They could bring in audiences for performances and so forth. And I'd mentioned the gentleman who started the Zenith Radio Company. They literally set up shop in this little, what I guess you would have to call a radio shack, that was located just north of the hotel. It was, you can see the call letters for the radio station here, 9ZN, and that ZN stood for Zenith. So they were Zenith was they not only made radios, but they also had a radio station, and the radio station ultimately was what became what they called WEBH, Edgewater Beach Hotel. That was in operation through most of the 1920s. And how did they get their broadcast signal out? It's primitive, but it worked. The hotel also had its own magazine. It was called Ripples. This is the cover from a copy we have at the Edgewater Historical Society from June 1928. You get this very nice schematic of the entire hotel complex there. And they published that, I think, through most of the history of the hotel. So they would have things about what's going on at the hotel as well as other things going on around town. And you also, in the early days at least, if you stayed at the hotel, your name appeared in the magazine. I don't know if too many hotels would do that kind of thing anymore, but they were very proud. They would list, all the people from California who stayed, and then they had a whole international section. So. And this is a page from the magazine in the 1950s. I loved it. It shows all the downtown movie theaters. God, it just breaks my heart to think of all those movie theaters that we once had, and I think maybe 2 of them are still around. So a great slice of lost Chicago right there. And here's another slice of lost Chicago, a page from the same issue showing some of the various restaurants around Chicago, which I don't think any of them remain. We still have the facade of the old Heidelberg building over here on Randolph, but otherwise, there's lost Chicago for you right there. So the hotel was not only a place for guests, but they also had permanent residents living there. And I'll just talk a little bit about the Edgewater Beach Apartments right now. Do we have any residents from the apartments with us? Oh, great. Okay. Well, thankfully, the Edgewater Beach Apartments building still survives. That was never part of the hotel complex, contrary to a lot of misinformation that floats around Chicago. It was built as a separate structure in the late 1920s. It opened in 1928, about 4 years after the hotel annex. It was always intended to be a full-time residential building. Here's a image of the entrance of the building in its heyday. They've done some remodeling on the exterior. Those grand colonnades and the giant urns are no longer there, but otherwise, most of the exterior is still remarkably intact. The hotel was about a block south of the apartments, and we'll see some other photos to give you a better sense for the spatial relationship there. But so there were several hundred apartments already at the Edgewater Beach Apartments. They opened just before the Great Depression began, so they had some leasing issues initially. And then the business also got a little slack at the hotel in the mid-30s, so they also converted some of the floors at the hotel into permanent residences. So this is a picture of the lobby of the Edgewater Beach Apartments, and it still looks almost identical to this day. This image here is just showing some of the, this is a publicity photo to show people what kind of class and elegance the building had. This is a Heydrich Blessing photo that's really, really lovely. Also, like the hotel, the apartments had a big shopping arcade that fronted onto Sheridan Road and was accessible both from the street and the lobby of the building. And again, they had all the amenities you could ever hope for, including shops and barber and beauty shops and so forth. And they also had an indoor pool at the apartments, and it's still very much intact. It's all being renovated right now. I don't know if it's completed yet. I think it's supposed to be completed this fall. Okay, it's a long
2 years.
2 years. It'll be beautiful once it's done. But they have this wonderful terrace by the pool as well, and you could have lunch there. Just lovely. This was a promotional postcard to advertise living at the hotel, and you can see the kind of clientele they were kind of aiming for, someone who looked like they might have had a few shekels and generally older and a little more distinguished than the usual person you might find on the street. So and this is a shot of Bryn Mawr Avenue, just east of where the CTA tracks go by right now. The train tracks were there back then as well. That tall building on the far end on the right-hand side is the Edgewater Beach Apartments, but the success of the hotel really spurred a lot of additional high-density residential development in that area. And these buildings, by and large, are still there to this day. The main type of structure on Sheridan Road at the time the hotel was built was single-family homes, and they were big houses, and there were a lot of very wealthy people who were living there. Oscar Mayer, the meat magnate, lived just about a block away from where the hotel was, so he was typical of a lot of the people up there. And let's talk a little bit about the main reason the hotel was there. It was there to take advantage of the lake. One of the main selling points for coming down to the hotel was just to get out of the awful, stifling Midwestern heat during the summer. They had a 1,000-foot-long boardwalk right along the lakefront. So that in itself was a selling point right there. I had mentioned that the hotel was built on kind of swampland, and this is what the land looked like before it was improved. So again, about half of the property of where the hotel ultimately went up was underwater at the time they secured the deal to build the land up there. It was Benjamin Marshall had bought some of the land there just south of Bryn Mawr, but there were two other businessmen in the neighborhood who had bought up most of the rest of that land where the hotel went, and their names were Connery and Corbett. There were a couple of thrifty businessmen who had a big vision for the neighborhood. So they teamed up, put their land together with Benjamin Marshall, and that's where they got the campus for the hotel. The one thing that they didn't succeed, so the lakefront in the city of Chicago was more or less controlled by the Park District, and when they made the deal on where the retaining wall would go and so forth, they did not secure what are known as riparian rights. That is, that they didn't have control over what would happen east of where their property line was, and that ultimately cost them, as you'll see, in the 1950s. So again, a fairly primitive landscape up there, and I think a lot of people just thought it's old nasty swampland and nothing good will ever become of it. So those businessmen proved them wrong. This is an image of the original hotel building shortly after it opened, and you can see there's a lot of water-oriented activity going on there with boating and so forth. You can see some of those beautiful houses that were also in the neighborhood in the background there. And the interesting thing about the Edgewater Beach Hotel is when it first opened, there actually wasn't any beach there. There was the retaining wall was built into the water. So for the first few years, there was no sand to speak of whatsoever, but the natural currents and flow of the water and sand in Lake Michigan ultimately led to a lot of sand piling up out in front. So their beach kept growing and growing over the years. Like in this photo you can see here. So a little bit of beach there. I'm guessing this was probably from the late 20s, or actually probably mid 30s. This is Sheridan, this is Foster Avenue here. So all that landfill that went up to Foster, was completed in the 1930s as part of the WPA. And then it wasn't until the 1950s that there was the money and motivation to extend Lakeshore Drive further north. And it hasn't gone anywhere since then. So we're 70 years and counting, more or less, on Lakeshore Drive expansions. This is probably the most iconic postcard of all of the Edgewater Beach Hotel complex. This is from like 1949, I believe, and the beach was quite substantial at that point. They also had a lot of prairie grasses growing along the western edge of the beach there. Here you can see the Edgewater Beach Apartments, still there. The Renaissance Building, still there. There are just a lot of other taller buildings that have also popped up in that neck of the woods, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I have one of the posters, as you were coming in, shows this same image with the outlines of the skyscrapers that replaced the hotel complex. So this is, I love this image. It just wasn't good enough quality to put into the book, but this is, as you're getting up to Foster Avenue and turning west to get onto Sheridan, as you can see the hotel complex there. And just another shot from that same era, roughly the early 1950s. This is Sheridan Road. Very busy street, thoroughfare. This is the hotel up here. And you can see some of those single family houses right across the street. So it was, Sheridan was just handling a lot of traffic. It was the main route to get from the North Shore to downtown. You would have to come by the hotel every day. So the beach kept growing, but then in 1947, the city inked the deal to extend Lakeshore Drive on this enormous lake fill of about 55 acres. So this is the early stages of putting in the new retaining walls there on the left-hand upper side of the image there. They ultimately put in about 55 acres of lake fill, as I mentioned. Most of that dirt was coming from the excavation site of the Eisenhower Expressway. So they were moving literally acres and acres of earth from one side of the city to the other. And I just can't even envision any project of that scope taking place in this city anymore. So, but here you got a great view of the complex here as well. And this is more or less what the project looked like when they were completed in 1957. So Lakeshore Drive went up to Bryn Mawr by 56, and then 57 is when it went a block further north to Hollywood. So they didn't technically lose their direct access to the lake. You could take these little footpaths, go under Lakeshore Drive, and get out to what's now Foster Beach. But they wanted to have the water a little closer to the action. So after they lost their beach access in 1953, they opened a swimming pool where the tennis courts had been to the north of the original building. And this wasn't just any swimming pool. It was the biggest swimming pool, outdoor swimming pool in Chicago. It was Olympic size and then some. And it was a scene for a lot of fun. I've had people come out to some of my talks before who used to hang out at this place all the time, like back in the 60s. And it was just a really fun scene. They built a series of cabanas, kind of like in a horseshoe shape that encircle the entire pool complex area. And a lot of stuff went on at the pool over the years. They had fashion shows and beauty contests. And then in the winter, I'm not sure if they actually did this or not, that they would freeze over the swimming pool for skating. This is a Christmas card the hotel would send out to all of its guests, any of its guests each year. And they definitely did have outdoor skating early on at they would freeze up the tennis courts for skating to try to promote reasons to come down to Chicago's Lakefront in the winter. Not the first place everyone would think of going in January or February, but why dwell on that? This is a great photo that was left to the Historical Society that didn't make it into the book. This man in the middle here, Everett Stetson, was one of the founding members of the Edgewater Historical Society. He was also a major benefactor of ours. He left us a nice chunk of change in his will that allowed us to open our museum up at Ashland and Balmoral. So this is him hanging out with his friends, and they are on the public beach area. And everyone in Chicago just assumes that every inch of the lakefront should be open to the public and so forth. But the Edgewater Beach Hotel kind of was an exception to that rule when it was around. They had that very tall fence there in the background to separate the hotel's beach from the beach for the rest of the riffraff. So I guess from time to time, some of the neighborhood kids would find a way to get around those fences, although they did go all the way into the water with the fencing as well. So just a quick word about famous people in the Edgewater Beach Hotel. One of the things that also made it famous, in addition to the famous musicians who played there, were the famous people who stayed there. And it's a very long list. You can go on the internet and find all kinds of names of people that were there. We couldn't necessarily confirm all of those names, but we included a lot of famous people in the book that we know were there for certain. That would be everyone from like Bob Hope and Bing Crosby to Barbara Stanwyck, Shirley Temple, a lot of other names I'll mention later on. But when you go online, you'll find a list of names. I think it's under the Tribune's website. So I don't know who their sources were, but they had Frank Sinatra, Betty Davis, Marilyn Monroe, Charlie Chaplin, FDR, Dwight Eisenhower. We're not sure about all those people. We know Eisenhower was supposed to stay there during the '52 convention, but then he ended up going downtown for another hotel. Mahatma Gandhi was alleged to have stayed there. Mahatma Gandhi had never actually been in America, so I don't know if that was the PR machine going, off the tracks. But there were definitely a lot of famous people who stayed at the hotel, and you never knew who you might see while you were at the hotel, which was part of the excitement of being there. I'll talk about a few of them momentarily, but I had mentioned Mr. Dewey beforehand. This is him right here. A very distinguished gentleman. This was probably around the time of World War II. He was an extraordinarily patriotic guy. He had 4 sons. They were all in the military in World War II, and he hosted a lot of functions at the hotel to support the war cause. There were receptions that were being held for the guys at training at Great Lakes Naval Academy. They would be guests of the hotel. They would get very good deals whenever they came to the hotel. He was a very patriotic guy. So the hotel was mainly, for the society set through the first 3 or 4 decades, but by the late 40s and 50s, when the convention business in America starts cranking up, they started doing a lot more trade shows. And I love this photo. It kind of shows, a nice cross section of high society and crass commercialism. So, this lady here is still with us. Her name is Marla Stanton. She gave us this photo for our book in the presentation. She started out as an assistant in the kitchen. She was quickly elevated to a pastry chef. She ended up marrying her husband, who was the head of food service at the hotel. After they were there till the hotel closed, and after it closed, they went and took over the Swedish bakery in Andersonville, and their family ran it until I think 3 or 4 years ago that they closed, sadly. But Marla Stanton still doing well into her 90s. As another picture of the worker in the hotel is Mr. Gonzalez, is all I know his name to be, but. I just want to talk a little bit about this kitchen. It was on the lower level of the hotel. At its heyday, it was producing somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 meals a day. They supplied not only the restaurants in the hotel, but all the banquet facilities, room service, and it was a major operation. I think they had probably a couple hundred people working in and around the kitchen. The hotel itself employed about 1,000 employees at the height of its success in the 1940s and 50s, and they really were a major employment center in Chicago. They were the single biggest employer of people who were in the Japanese internment camps. The hotel sponsored dozens of them to come moved to Chicago and work at the hotel. And I live in the Edgewater neighborhood, and there's still many families still up in the neighborhood from that whole movement. So weddings were a popular thing to have at the hotel. We got a lot of photos at the museum that people donate to us, after they're maybe cleaning out a deceased relative's home or something. So we picked up a lot of things. Many of them are in the book. This is one that didn't make it in the book, but it's no names or anything, but here they are. I'm guessing it's a young wedding couple. They are standing out in front of the main lobby, the main entrance to the hotel on Sheridan Road. There was this beautiful portico that served as the main entry gate to the hotel. This wonderful sign up there. We don't have it at our museum, but they do have it at the Chicago History Museum. There's a small exhibit on the hotel there, so you can still see that sign over there. And there was a lot of remodeling going on at the hotel over the years. The Marine Dining Room, which I had referenced previously, in the 1950s got a complete makeover, and it was turned into Polynesian Village. And there you get a sense for what that was all about. It was a very, very over-the-top design. There's a 2-page spread of the ad for it in the book. And it was, I think, part and parcel of that whole craze for all things South Pacific in the 1950s. It lasted about 7-8 years as Polynesian Village, but it was a very popular place for proms. And this was a prom from the St. Gregory's High School in 1958 taking place there. So we have any people who went to proms at the Edgewater Beach Hotel? All right. We got to hear some anecdotes afterwards. All right. So famous people I'd mentioned. This is Johnny Weissmuller, the famous Olympic swimmer and later on Tarzan of the movies. So he really first rose to prominence at a swim match at the out in front of the hotel in the lake. He tied the world record on the 50-yard swim and started getting his name in the papers. A couple of years later, he started winning gold medals at the Olympics. And he's also another alum of my high school, Lane Tech. And this is we really rely on the kindness of strangers at the museum quite a bit. One of our members was down at the Swimmers Hall of Fame in Palm Beach, Florida, and they took this picture of this wonderful medal that the hotel presented to Johnny Weissmuller after he kind of broke through to fame at the hotel. This image here, this is the logo of the hotel. This is the floor plan of the original hotel building. It's called a Maltese cross. And then you see kind of the gardens on the side and the boat out in the lake. So that was the crest of the hotel for as long as it stood. I would also say Johnny Weissmuller also came back to the hotel on a number of occasions later in the years. He was also out at that pool quite a bit and signing autographs and posing for pictures. So. Babe Ruth, a lot of baseball players also spent time at the Edgewater Beach, mainly National League teams that were coming into town to play the Cubs. And this is Babe Ruth from the day in 1932 where he had his famous called home run out into the bleachers of Wrigley Field. There's a quick story. I'll try to keep it quick. Allegedly, what prompted Babe Ruth to make that declaration that he was going to knock that ball out into that certain spot at Wrigley Field was, as he was leaving the hotel, some very disrespectful Cub fans spat on him. And that kind of got to Babe. He was a guy known for his short temper. So he said, I'll show those people. So if you're a Cubs fan, you might know that they lost the World Series in 5 games that year. So they didn't get past Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig, who also spent a lot of time at the hotel. So that beautiful outdoor dance floor that I talked about previously, the beach walk, it was somewhat obsolete once Lakeshore Drive was extended north. It was kind of hard to hear beautiful music when cars are zooming by at 60 miles an hour. But they repurposed the area. They erected an enormous circus-like tent And they did summer stock theater there for 6 years, starting in 1956. And they had really an amazing array of stars who came out for these programs. They would run shows typically 4 to 6 weeks and have like a series of 4 or 5 plays each summer. This is the actress Susan Strasberg. She was the daughter of Lee Strasberg, the famed founder of the Actors Method Studio in New York City that trained Marlon Brando and Paul Newman and all those other famous actors. She was also a famous actress, and she was appearing at the hotel with the 1930s film star Franchot Tone in a production of Caesar and Cleopatra. But there were a number of other really major figures who were in shows here. Tallulah Bankhead, Groucho Marx, Mae West, Ann Sheridan, Tony Randall. I can go on and on. We have a lot of that in the book as well. But the tent would accommodate up to an audience of up to 950 people. It was very big productions. The 2 guys who ran the theater were both graduates of Senn High School, not too far from the hotel, and both of them went on to very major careers in show business. And then there were famous people at the hotel, and then there were notorious people at the hotel. And this young lady here, Ruth Steinhagen, probably walked in the annals of Chicago infamy faster than anyone else in history. She was an obsessive Cubs fan who had quite a thing for a ball player named Eddie Waitkiss, who was later traded to Philadelphia. When they were in town to play the Cubs, the team was all staying at the hotel. This is in 1948. And Mr. Waitkiss was at a bar, and he got a note from the waiter saying there was a woman up in a room in the hotel who had to see him on some very important matter. So he goes up there. I'm not sure what he was expecting, but when he opened the door, she was waiting with a shotgun and shot him in the chest. And she said, something to the effect, I've been waiting for years to do this. Anyhow, miraculously he lived and was able to resume his baseball career. That whole episode was more or less copped, hook, line, and sinker in the Bernard Malamud book, The Natural, which was later made into a movie with Robert Redford. So that scene where Redford gets shot, it was all right out of the Edgewater Beach Hotel. Then in the 1960s, really infamous, Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters did a lot of business at the hotel. It was kind of their main meeting place throughout in the Americas through much of the 1960s. He was the occupant of the $1,000 a day presidential suite when he was staying at the hotel, and he would stay there for weeks on end. He was actually at the Edgewater Beach when the feds indicted him for racketeering, and he held an impromptu news conference out in front of the hotel saying that the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, was a dirty rat and things like that. But they brought a lot of business to the hotel. The hotel had been sold twice in the 1950s and 60s, and with each change of ownership, it seemed that maybe its fortunes were sagging a little more. These buyers were doing the typical thing, borrowing lots of money to buy something, and then they didn't have enough money to service the debt. So they started cutting corners and so forth. So by the mid-60s, the hotel was starting to get a little dog-eared, but it was still doing pretty good business. But the Teamsters hanging around certainly didn't add to its reputation as being a high-class kind of joint any longer. And I have no idea if maybe he's buried on the property up there somewhere. So, I don't know why. This is another very crooked figure that I want to talk about. And this was a somewhat well-known mobster in his day, Fifi Buccieri. And in the summer before the hotel closed in 1967, there was a big birthday party held for him at the Edgewater Beach, and unbeknownst to him, all the waiters were undercover FBI guys, and it was a big sting, and this was more bad press for the Edgewater Beach Hotel, but the feds got their man. Very quickly, I wanted to talk a little bit about a whole other Edgewater Beach, Edgewater Hotel that was out there. This was the Edgewater Golf Hotel. It was also designed by Benjamin Marshall and funded by the same team that brought us the hotel here in Chicago. This was kind of the winter getaway for the clientele in Chicago that didn't want to spend winters here. They could get on the Illinois Central train and get down to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, where this hotel was located, not too far from Biloxi. It was all the same types of amenities, only on a much grander scale. They had the hotel there. They had an 18-hole golf course. They had an enormous system of riding trails, and they also had all the action out there on the water. So this was, very sedate-looking scene that I wouldn't mind being part of right about now. So, here's your typical golfer of the era, and this is has a slightly Okefenokee swamp kind of aura to it, but that's what you'd see out on the bridle paths. And then, of course, there's all the boating and so forth. They had all kinds of things going on there. So, so by the late 50s, the hotel, it was losing some of its business, in part maybe because of Lakeshore Drive, but probably more significantly just because people's vacation ideas were changing in the 50s. The whole idea of staying at a local resort hotel wasn't maybe as attractive when you can get in a car and drive across the interstate system and go out to places, points west, Route 66 and all that stuff. So they did a big remodeling on the hotel in the late 50s, and they tried to make it more of a hotel oriented toward conventions and made a big play for the convention business. So a lot of these grand old spaces like this got a makeover and started looking a little more buttoned down and corporate in the 50s. And in the book, we have a lot of pictures contrasting those beautiful lobby lounge spaces that I talked about earlier got turned into very banal looking corporate meeting spaces. It's just kind of heartbreaking to think about. But and they never really quite got into the convention business as they were hoping. The whole center of gravity for that industry was really downtown, and then further to the south with McCormick Place opening in the 60s. So, but still the hotel was drawing a lot of people, and in the 50s and 60s, it was generating a lot of additional construction of motels in the neighborhood. So there were 3 motels within a block or 2 of the Edgewater Beach that went up. This one, the Tropicana, was at Sheridan and Catalpa, and only came down just in the last few years. They're building a new condominium building over there. But these motels, as the years wore on, started to develop a slightly unsavory reputation. I saw a couple of interesting articles. The former alderman who once ran for mayor in Chicago, John Holden, especially was not a fan of a lot of the comings and goings that happened at these hotels, and the hourly room rates and things like that were definitely not what the Edgewater Beach Hotel wanted to be any part of. So it was just another general shot from that general era of the late 1950s. So very busy scene out in front of the hotel there with buses and taxis and so forth coming and going. And then, things were kind of bumping along for the hotel, but then abruptly in 1967, 2 days before Christmas, the owners decided that the business just wasn't working out the way they hoped for, and they were closing down today. And they told all the guests staying at the hotel that they had till the end of the day to find another hotel to go stay in. And there were residents in the building. There were about 100 plus residents, including some who'd been in there since the 1930s. They had one day to find another place to leave. So it was a very ignoble ending to the whole affair. This is one of the waiters here taking in the news, the not very good news. And this is what the scene looked like out in front that same day. This is that once beautiful entry portico they had. There's great picture of it in the book, but it got replaced by this, again, more corporate looking kind of entrance. But they still had this great marquee here, and it's funny, in the marine dining room, after it went through its phases, the Polynesian Village went back to a more general dining room kind of space, but they still had a lot of live entertainment in there. George Gobel was a famous comedian, well, semi-famous comedian. He was from Chicago. He was a frequent guest on Johnny Carson's show. He was playing there the week that it all went down. I just recently learned that Louis Armstrong was booked for a 2-week stand starting the week after the hotel closed, so we missed out on that. So anyhow, it was a quick and ignoble ending. This is a very poor quality picture, but I just wanted to show this was one of the last regular residents of the hotel, waving goodbye. But so the hotel closed abruptly in December '67, but they were hatching plans to sell off the property in bankruptcy court, and that process took a little bit of time. In the meantime, they had the hotel building sitting there before they had a plan to take it down. So they ended up leasing it in 1968 to Loyola University to use as a dormitory for 1 year. And these lucky co-eds got to hang out in one of the fanciest hotels in America while they're going to school. So were there any Loyola students maybe in the crowd? I've met a couple at other talks I've given. So they said it was really the bomb. You can't imagine that presidential suite that Jimmy Hoffa used to rent out was the student lounge. So must have been nice. So after that year, the following year in '69, they had a big auction. It was, I think, a 2 or 3 day affair. Everything must go. So all the furniture, all the linens, all the ashtrays. There are a lot of Edgewater Beach Hotel ashtrays out there in circulation. And then fixtures. I think this is some gizmo that got yanked out of the yacht club, was being hauled off by a happy purchaser. So, they kind of sold off everything they could. And then I've heard a lot of stories from people, they kind of just left the whole place hanging wide open, and it was not secured very well. My brother-in-law has a couple friends who used to go in there all the time. They just wander around the place, and I guess the cops were too busy with other stuff to bother. This picture here kills me. I found it on Facebook, and I reached out to the owner to say, could you tell me more about this picture? But this is him with a couple of his friends. It's not very good quality, but they're up on the roof of the hotel while it was being torn down. Those are sailboats in the lake out in the background there, but here you can see the roof is actually, the building's being torn down, and these goofballs are in there running around. So they were maybe amateur Richard Nichols. Well, this was before Richard Nichols. I don't know, maybe Richard Nichols is one of the people in that photo. I don't know. But the hotel demolition project was expected to take 6 months, but the place was so solidly built. It was, the proverbial, brick, what. The contractor thought it would be a 6-month job. It took them 13 months. It was so solidly built. It nearly bankrupted the demolition company. Serves them right. So, but the hotel, the demolition of it, and was there anyone here, anyone in the audience who was among the crowds that would go out there and photograph it? There were armies of people who'd come by all the time just to watch it come by and shake their fist at the whole thing. It was a sad situation, but it ultimately did come down. Here's the taller tower, half gone. So the completion of the demolition work was in April of 1971, which was kind of the 50th anniversary of when our book came out. So that's one of the things we're shooting for, to take advantage of that anniversary. And here we are with kind of a classic photo. There's that grand entrance portico that welcomed visitors. Once you stepped in through the doors there, you were kind of entering into another world of glamour and beauty and excitement. And we got a lot of different photos in the book that really kind of play up some of the beautiful interior spaces. And there was this One last great color photo postcard showing the whole campus. So one other quick misconception that people had was that the hotel was also pink because the apartment building is pink. But actually the hotel was more of a kind of a beige, a sandy beige color. And Benjamin Marshall said the idea was that the color of the hotel was the color of the sunrise coming up over the lake, and then the color of the apartments was the pink of the sunset. So, thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions anyone might have, but if you also have a great anecdote or two you'd like to share, would love to hear it. So, yes, sir.
You can get a sense of the elegance that Benjamin Marshall created at the hotel and South Shore Country Club.
Yes, absolutely.
In fact, many of the elements that you've shown, including the walkways, the covered walkways, and the rooms facing the lake, and the casino, and the ballroom are.
Absolutely, yes. I should have mentioned that, yes. Another Benjamin Marshall creation right on the waterfront that we're lucky to still have. And so if you've never been down to the South Shore Cultural Center, you should get down there. Also, Marshall designed, in addition to the Blackstone, the Drake Hotel. So I think the interior of the Drake Hotel gives you a better sense of what the Edgewater Beach would have been like in its heyday. So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so all those people who lived, excuse me, all those people who lived in those big fancy single family homes, what did they think about having that large hotel blocking their view of the lake?
Well, to the immediate west of the hotel, not all of that land was developed. I don't know. I'm sure some people weren't happy about it, but on the other hand, it brought so much prestige and excitement to the neighborhood. So a lot of the activities that were going on in that hotel, they had many individual rooms for private gatherings and so forth. So there were like bridge clubs and all kinds of stuff going on. There had been a private country club in Edgewater prior to the hotel opening, but so much of its clientele wound up over at the hotel that ended up closing. So, yes, sir.
How, given the hotel was such a large employer and it had so much prestige, did they just not play their politics well to prevent Lakeshore Drive from being put in front of them?
They were more or less handcuffed, but I don't know if they even would have thought at any point when they were building the hotel in the teens that Lakeshore Drive might come that far north. Back, I think prior to the work that was done during the Depression, Lakeshore Drive terminated either at like Addison or Irving Park. So it was 2 miles south, and I don't know if anyone knows the history of all that lake fill that was done, but I'd like to know what the hell did that cost. And there's still some ongoing talk about possibly extending Lakeshore Drive all the way up to the Evanston border, but I can't imagine our current government's ever getting their act together enough to do something like that. So, they just didn't plan ahead. I don't think there was any way they would have been able to get the riparian rights. So, I kind of say it was like Brigadoon. It was an amazing place that only lasted for a short time. One other point I'd like to make, it closed in 1967 along with another legendary Chicago institution associated with fun, Riverview. So Riverview was for the common folk. The Edgewater Beach Hotel was for the hoi polloi. So.
Was there any move at the time to save the hotel when it was going to be turned?
Not really. There were so many things being knocked down in the 1960s. I quote, someone from Preservation Chicago in the book talking about what was going on at that time, and there was such an ethos in the air that like old things in the 1960s were kind of considered passé, and who'd want this? So There were amazing buildings being knocked down in downtown Chicago around that same time, and there was a very nascent preservation effort kind of bubbling up from the early 60s on, but ultimately it was too little too late to really try to save the hotel. So I'll be over here one last.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. My name is Lindsay Hughey. I'm a member of the Cliff Dwellers for 15 years. I want to introduce a friend of mine whose father worked at the Edgewater Beach Hotel. You should also be aware of this man. This is Tom Donnelly, and he is a candidate for a circuit court judge here in Chicago. He is currently a judge, and I would not do this, and I don't mean to hijack John's excellent presentation, except that he has a story to share, and Tom Donnelly is an excellent judge. He is outstanding. I too am a judge. I worked for Tom in the law office. Story.
I got a traffic ticket.
So it's sort of appropriate, the traffic ticket. So my dad was a high school student at St. George's High School. Anybody know where that was?
Sure.
Evanston, South parking lot. And he lived in Rogers Park. And his family was not very well to do. So my dad got a job not only on the weekends working for Andy Frayne, but he worked nights at the Edgewater Beach Hotel as a bellhop while he's going to high school. But the heartwarming part of the story is he shows up because his family needs the money. This is 1941 to 1944 is when he worked there. And the senior guy on the bellhop staff says, "Billy, go to sleep in the boiler room and rest up for classes. I'll handle the bags." Yeah, that's a Chicago story and a real heartwarming story because it enabled him to support his family by making a few bucks. But my question for John is, how much did a bellhop earn at the Edgewater Beach Hotel?
It was all with tips. We made no tips.
He made no tips, he was sleeping in the boiler room.
If it was 5 cents an hour, I'd be surprised.
Okay, well, this has been wonderful. I want you to join me in thanking John for a wonderful presentation. And also, thank you, John. We have
Thank
a
you.
token of appreciation,
All
a
right.
Midland Authors mug, and a 1-year free membership in the Society of Midland Authors.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Brad.